you, I'm just as shocked being up here as you are seeing me up here. A few teaching quarters ago, I had the honor of actually sitting at Ted's feet in a Wednesday night class. Over here, Ted had invited most of the men in the congregation, the young men, up to my age and maybe a little older. My dad was in there as well. And Ted was passing on some of his wisdom and his knowledge to us younger people, and he was giving us instructions in public speaking. He was kind of giving us some pointers on what to do and what not to do. And in this class we had, of course, as you know, we're full of a lot of great public speakers here. I'm not one of them, but the class was full of them. And Ted was helping us out. He was giving us pointers. And Ted had went around and he assigned each one of us a character in the Bible that says, okay, this is your subject. You give about a 5-minute talk on him, whatever you want to talk about. And at the end of your talk, Ted would call on people in the class, say, okay, well, how do you do? And the individuals in the class would say, well, he did real good here. And Ted would say, well, what about, is there any room for improvement? Now, if you know my boys will never speak up in class. They never speak unless they're called on, except the night that it was my turn to talk. When I got done with my little lesson, as brief as it was, Ted didn't have to call on anybody. My tool was right there. Ted, he didn't do this. He didn't do that. He needs to do this. He needs to do that. I've raised these boys from day one, and I didn't know that they were scholars of public speaking. But if you need advice on how to get through a public speaking event, get with them. Ted had assigned me Peter. So I thought, well, since I'd already done that, I'm going to try to add to that. Let that be my lesson tonight. But when you think of the 12 apostles, the original 12 apostles, what do you think about? What comes to mind when you think about these guys and their life here on earth? Me personally, I think of these guys had to be the salt of the earth, right? They had to be the holiest of the holy. Because these guys were handpicked by Jesus himself. Jesus is not going to come down here and he's not going to pick the average Joe off the street. He's not going to pick somebody that's go around giving bad examples of how to live life as a Christian. He's going to pick men that he thought could emulate himself more so than the rest of the world. Now, this is just my thoughts. But what did Jesus do? He came down and he picked these 12 men who possibly, maybe they weren't the scholars of the time. But in my opinion, Jesus, he's going to pick the closest that he could to men that could emulate himself. Tonight I want to look at Peter and some of the examples that Peter gave us while he was walking with Jesus. To give a brief background on Peter, Matthew chapter 16, verse 17, tells us that his given name was Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon the son of Jonah. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 tells us that Peter had a brother named Andrew, and these guys were fishermen by trade. Acts chapter 4, verse 13, Peter was possibly an uneducated or untrained man. Peter may not have had the highest education, given his trade of fisherman. Mark chapter 1, verse 30 confirms that Peter also was a married man. Peter, in his time with Jesus, he ends up writing 2 books in the New Testament, 1st and 2nd Peter, of course. And as an apostle, Peter gives us several great examples of how to live life as a Christian. Luke chapter 18, it tells us that when Peter had approached Peter and his brother Andrew and said, "Come and follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men," that these guys, they immediately left everything that they knew, everything that they had, to come and follow Jesus. Now that's hard for us to imagine in today's standards, in today's terms. But it makes me wonder about Peter sometimes, and this is just me speculating, spitballing if you will. But do you think Peter was a newlywed at this time? think Peter's out here on his job site one day, and Jesus comes up and throws it. We've got some newlyweds in here, Blake and Morgan. I warned them they'd be mentioned tonight. You imagine Blake at a job site, and some guy will just stroll up and say, Blake, why don't you come work for me? Blake's like, what am I going to be doing? Well, we're going to be walking from city to city. Where we're going to be staying? Well, I can't really tell you that. Don't know. Will depend on the people when we get there. May end up sleeping outside or in the cave with the cows. Who knows? What are we going to do for food? Well, I can't promise you that either. We'll get by. Now, Blake being a newlywed, that's probably not even going to tempt him in the slightest. And when Jesus tells him, well, we may be gone for a week or two at a time. You may be gone for a month. You may not get to come home and see your beautiful bride for a year. I'm pretty sure Blake's not going to have any issues at all turning this down. What's Peter do? Peter and Andrew, they jumped on it. Now, Jessica and I have been married for about 25 years, and I do have a job where I may be gone for a week at a time. Now, after 25 years, I also have stints to where I'm in the office for maybe 5-6 weeks at a time, and I don't have a show. And usually about that third week, Jessica's, when's your next show? When's your next trip? But not Peter. Peter and Andrew, they jumped on this. Acts chapter 8 tells us of Peter helping to establish the church in Samaria. And in Acts chapter 10, we can read that Peter was one of the first ones to take the gospel to the Gentiles. And at this point in time, Jesus probably didn't have a lot of volunteers. He probably didn't have a long line of people like, yeah, I'll travel to those foreign cities, because these men were afraid of persecution. They were afraid of imprisonment, maybe even being stoned to death. But we can read where Peter took that challenge. He says, I'll go. Acts chapter 9, we can read of Peter healing a paralyzed man. And later on in that same chapter, not only did he heal a paralyzed man, but he raises Tabitha or Dorcas from the dead. What about in Acts chapter 2, which they just read for us, the day of Pentecost? Here you've got an uneducated fisherman who's been tasked to speak to a crowd of thousands. Peter's not going to do that. But he did it. Acts chapter 2, verse 38 of Envy's lesson wants to say, repent, let every one of you be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And what happens? Not only did Peter make it through this lesson that he taught, but he added 3,000 souls to the Lord's church that day. One day. Peter adds 3,000. Can you imagine how nervous he must have been? This guy spent his whole life fishing, and now he's talking in front of huge crowds. If you would, turn with me to Acts chapter 3. Acts chapter 3, I'm going to start with verse 1. Now Peter and John went up together to the temple at the hour of prayer, the ninth hour. And a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms from those who entered the temple. Who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked for alms. Fixing his eyes on him, Peter with John said, "Look at us." So the man gave them his attention, expecting to receive something from them. And then Peter said, "Silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." And he took him by the right hand, lifted him up, and immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. So he, leaping up, stood and walked and entered the temple with them, walking, leaping, and praising God. And all the people saw him walking and praising God. Now when you think of the original 12 apostles, isn't this exactly what you think of? Isn't that exactly what you would expect these men to be doing? Preaching the gospel to the lost, establishing churches, baptizing, adding souls to the church, going around healing the sick, healing the paralyzed. Peter's even raising the dead, performing all these different miracles. Isn't that what you think of when you think of the original 12 apostles? Right? You see, Peter gives us other examples as well. Peter was known to be outspoken at times. Peter asked a ton of questions. You can read where Jesus is teaching his apostles, and usually Jesus is speaking in parables, and usually at the end of the parable, there's Peter. He's asking a question about it. What in the world are you talking about? But Peter is known to ask a lot of questions. He's outspoken at times. He's strong-willed. He's a passionate man. If you would, let's look at Matthew chapter 20, or Matthew 18, verse 21. Matthew chapter 18, verse 21. It says, Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to Peter, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. This is one of Peter's probably most famous questions that he asks. How often do I need to forgive an erring brother? Maybe he's sinning directly against me. How many chances do I give him? And Jesus is telling Peter, so Peter, our forgiveness, it's a continuous effort on our part. There's no number that you need to be focused on. Your job is just to forgive your erring brother. Another time that we can read about where Peter was quick to speak up, he had his apostles gathered together. This story is going to be found in Matthew chapter 16. Jesus has got his apostles gathered together, and he asked them a question. Who do men say that I am? This is Jesus speaking, and he's asking his apostles, because they've been out preaching, right? Who do men say that I am? Some of these apostles started throwing some answers at him. Well, one of them speaks up and says, well, Jesus, I was over here, and these guys, they say that you have to be John the Baptist. Somebody else may have spoken up at the time and said, well, now the people over here where I was at last week, they're saying that you've got to be Jeremiah or Elijah. And they started throwing these names at Jesus, and he interrupts them. And he asked them a direct question. He's like, but who do you say that I am? They're telling you who they think. Do you correct them? Who do you say? Who do you think that I am? Who do you tell these people that I am? Well, here's Peter's moment to shine. This is another opportunity for him to speak up first, right? Well, let's look at Matthew chapter 16, starting at verse 16. Jesus had just asked him, but who do you say that I am? He interrupted him. Starting with verse 16. And Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against you. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So here's Peter, who's known to ask a lot of questions. He may give you the impression of somebody that craves the attention, because when he enters the room, he's talking, right? He's asking questions, and he seems to be the center of everybody's attention. But did you catch how Jesus answered him when Peter said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God? Jesus said, you're right, Peter. And because of that, I'm going to hand you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. He's bragging on Peter. Good job, Peter. Now, somebody that likes attention now he's getting praised in front of all these other apostles. You think that made Peter feel good? That may have boosted his ego a little bit? That maybe he may have looked at the other guys and said, you hear that, fellas? I've got the keys to the kingdom. You want in, you better shape up because you're coming through me. He probably didn't do that, but this made Peter feel good at the time. Jesus is bragging on him. Why wouldn't it make him feel good? But with all Peter's great accomplishments, all the great examples that he gave us that we can read about, he also showed us that one of the 12, one of the original 12 that Jesus handpicked, had his moments of weakness. He can make mistakes, just like you and I, because he wasn't perfect like Jesus. We wanted to look at Peter's examples of living the Christian life. There are so many of them. And some people may even argue that Peter was the apostle that Jesus loved the most. Because we can read example after example of Jesus choosing Peter to go with him when he left the other ones behind. Or you read some versions of the Last Supper. There's one that in particular where Peter's asking Jesus, who's the one that's going to betray you? And in that gospel it says, and Jesus told the apostle whom he loved, Peter. So Peter gives us great examples. But we remember the story in Matthew chapter 26, where Jesus had asked Peter to go with him. So they're in the Garden of Gethsemane, and when they go in, Jesus tells the apostles, okay, you guys wait here, but he chooses Peter. He's like, okay, Peter, you come with me, you and a couple of the other apostles. And they go on into the garden a little ways, and Jesus is like, okay, Peter, wait here, watch and pray. I'm going to go on up and pray. You guys watch and pray. And we can read Jesus goes on up. Jesus prays for a while, and when he comes back to Peter, there's Peter. He's watching and praying just like Jesus had asked, right? Now, that's not right at all. Peter was doing the exact opposite. He's sound asleep. Jesus has to wake him up, and we read that this happens 3 times. Jesus comes back, and all 3 times Peter's asleep. Jesus is like, Peter, you can't do this one thing that I ask, watch and pray. I come back and you're asleep. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, Jesus told him. Another time in John chapter 18, Jesus' betrayal. The soldiers are coming to arrest Jesus. They have been praying. Here the moment is at hand. Peter's looking around, and here comes this large group of men, large group of soldiers. Peter stepped back, and he's watching Judas. Judas goes up and gives Jesus that betrayal kiss, right? That way the soldiers could identify which one was Jesus. Judas told him, I'll kiss the man that you need to be arrested. That's Jesus. So Judas goes up and gives Jesus that betrayal kiss. The soldiers go up to Jesus. Well, what's Peter doing? He said, because Peter was known to sometimes act without thinking. Sometimes Peter spoke before he thought about what he was saying. Sometimes he may come across as a little brash. But in this instance, what does Peter do? Peter sees that Jesus is about to get arrested. He runs over there, he draws his sword. He slices off the guy's ear. One of the high priests had brought his servants, and Peter sliced off an ear of one of the high priest's servants. And Jesus is getting arrested, but what did Jesus have to do? Jesus is like, Peter, calm down. Put your sword away. I told you about this. This has to happen. So there's another example of Peter acting without thinking. Peter gives all kinds of examples. But when you think about Peter, and maybe some of the mistakes that Peter had made, what's the one mistake that comes to mind the most? What's Peter's most famous blunder of all? Matthew chapter 26, if you'd like to turn there with me. Matthew chapter 26. I'm going to start reading at verse 30. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered and said to him, even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. Jesus said to him, assuredly I say to you this night, before the rooster crows, Peter, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the other disciples. Now, if you read the other Gospels, if you read this story in the other Gospels, their version is when Peter said the second time, even if I have to deny you, even if I have to die, I will not deny you, that he said it more sternly. Vehemently, they said, Peter said this the second time. And then they all said the same. Can you imagine Jesus saying, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times? And Peter's like, Jesus, I am ready to die for you. These guys, yep, they're probably going to stumble, but not me. You can trust me. I will not deny you. I'm ready to die with or for you. These guys, probably not me. That's what Peter just said. Now, I don't have the best of memories. But if Mitchell had called me this morning and said, Jeremy, you know, after church tonight, you don't need to drive toward Tennessee Tech. It's Halloween night. I've heard there's going to be 100 people up here throwing eggs, starting at the county line up. If he told me that this morning, I'm probably not going to go jump my truck after church and head to town for an ice cream, because I don't want to get egged. But now, had he told me last week, tonight there's a pretty good chance I would have forgotten. On my way to town, I might get hit with an egg. But when that first egg hit my truck, I'm going to think, you know what? My brother warned me about this. I better turn around and head back home and do what's right. So you would think Jesus telling Peter, tonight, 3 times you will deny me. 3 times. Peter's like, not me. Can't trust those guys. They may stumble, but not me. What happens? How's the story end? That same chapter, Matthew chapter 26. Start at verse 69. Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and the servant girl came to him saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied it before them all, saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Strike 1. Strike 1. Does Peter rush back and say, hang on a second, I know what's going on here. I got the call, I was warned. Let's keep reading. Verse 71. And when he'd gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, this guy right here, this fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again, he denied with an oath, I do not know that man. Strike 2. He denied with an oath. What's that mean? I promise you, I don't know that man. I wasn't with him. Girl, you don't know what you're talking about. That's twice. Verse 73. And after a while, those who stood by came to him and said, Peter, surely you also are one of them, because your speech betrays you. Your speech betrays you. Now, I can relate to Peter in this situation. I travel a lot. You get north of Kentucky, you get west of the Mississippi. Whether I'm at a customer's place of business, whether I'm at a trade show, or if I'm just sitting down ordering my dinner for the night. For the last 20-something years, almost without fail, every trip I go on, when I'm ordering dinner or I'm talking to somebody always says, where are you from? They know I'm not from around there. They understand that. And I like to play that game. I know what they're referring to. It doesn't bother me, but I like to throw them a curveball. Because without fail, I always say, I'm from New Jersey. And you know what answer I get? I get the same answer that these guys told Peter. Like, Jeremy, we know you're lying. Your speech betrays you. Except they worded more like, well, you sound like you're from Texas. These people probably never been to Texas, because we don't sound like we're from Texas either. But I understand what these guys mean when they say, Peter, Your speech betrays you. Peter's got 2 strikes on him at this point. What happens? Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. And immediately a rooster crowed. Immediately a rooster crowed. That rooster was like the 1 o'clock in the morning, I bet. Peter heard that. What did he do then? He run his brothers, the other apostles. He run and say, guys, you ain't gonna believe what I did. I can't believe what I did. Can you imagine how sorrowful, how embarrassed Peter had to have been when that rooster crowed? Because he just threw these guys under the bus. Even if they are made to stumble, Jesus, not me. I'm not going to stumble. You can count on me. I'm ready to die with or for you. That rooster crowed. What had Peter done? 3 times. Just like Jesus had told him. It never hit home with him after the first time. Can you imagine how sorrowful, how remorseful Peter was when he heard that rooster crow? What did Peter do? And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, who had said to him just a few hours earlier, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And what did he do? He went out and wept bitterly. We call that alligator tears, sobbing uncontrollably today, don't we? He wept bitterly. He knew he had just let Jesus down. Jesus said, you're going to deny me. Peter's like, these fellas, they're the ones, you mean them. Peter just let Jesus down 3 times in a row. Is that what you think about when you think of Peter? All the mistakes he made? Him denying Jesus? What do you think about when you think of the 12 apostles? When you think of Peter? I'd like to share my personal favorite story of Peter. You would turn with me to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. I'm going to start reading verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And the multitudes, Jesus had just fed the 5,000. He told his apostles, you guys get in this boat, head on across the sea. I'm going to stay here and see them away. I'll catch up with you later tonight. Verse 23. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he, Jesus, went up on a mountain by himself to pray. And when evening had come, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Remember that. The wind was contrary. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it's a ghost. And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I. Do not be afraid. Who's the first one to speak of it? Here we are again. Peter's moment to shine, right? Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And why what Peter said, no, Lord, if it's you, calm the seas, get in this boat, we're hungry, let's get out of here. No, that's not Peter's way. Peter sees this opportunity to maybe do something that nobody else had ever done. So he looks at Jesus and says, command me to come to you on the water. Now the other guys, remember, they're afraid. They thought it was a ghost. Maybe, back then, maybe ghosts were a thing, and it could have been, and this ghost just wanted to have a little love with these guys. Yeah, come on. Peter jumps over the boat, and down he goes. But no, Peter recognized the voice. It's me, Jesus, don't be afraid. But instead of asking Jesus, hey, come help us out here, he says, let me walk on water to you. What's Jesus say? Let's keep reading. Verse 29. So he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, caught him, and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got to the boat, the wind ceased. And those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. Truly you are the Son of God. Now, when I was 16, I had my first job in Cookeville working at a grocery store. And 30 years ago, for some reason, we had a calendar in the offices, and this calendar, it was a day calendar, so each day you took that day off. But it had an inspirational quote or a motivational quote attached to each day. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. And for whatever reason, I read it that day, and 30 years later, I still remember. This said, obstacles only come along when you take your eyes or focus off your goal. For whatever reason, that stuck with me that day. It made a little sense, maybe. Obstacles only come along when you take your eyes or focus off your goal. For instance, if I wanted to go out that front door right now, if I'm looking at that door, I'm pretty sure I can navigate my way down these steps, around that table, and down that aisle, and make my way out that door without any issues. Now, I've got a couple of prankster cousins there, Tim and Mark, sitting there in the aisle. They may think, you know what would be funny? I threw my leg out here and tripped over Jeremy on his way out that door. That'd be funny. But if I've got my eyes focused on that door, and those legs hit that aisle, I'll see that. I'll be able to step over that, maybe step around it, and I'll make my way out. But I'm on my way out that door, and I'm thinking about what happened years ago, looking behind me. I'm looking over here at John's beautiful Ford Dually pickup truck. Here comes those legs in that aisle. They're going to get a big laugh because I'm going to be busting my nose, right? I've been tripping and falling because my focus is not where it needs to be. I'm more concerned with this over here or that over there. Isn't that what we see in that story there with Peter? He jumps out of that boat and he's on his way to Jesus in the middle of a storm. I don't know if you've ever been in the middle of the sea, but on a cloudless, beautiful days, when you're in the middle of the ocean, those waves are huge. You've got a little boat, it's going to get in the valley of those waves. I can't imagine the size of these waves in the middle of a storm when the winds are contrary. They're boisterous. But when I read this story, I like to think Peter knew that that was Jesus. He knew exactly that Jesus was going to let him walk on water. I like to think that Peter jumped out of that boat and he took off running just as fast as he could. And he's running and he's running and maybe he starts slowing down and he starts noticing the size of these waves. Maybe he sees these obstacles coming that's getting in his way. Maybe he's paying more attention to the circumstances that life is throwing his way. He takes his eyes off his goal. He takes his focus off of Jesus just for a moment. But that's all it took. What happened? Peter started to sink. Now, did Jesus take this opportunity to say, well, you know what? I'm going to let him sink. I'm going to let him get down to his nostrils, and I'm going to go over there and I'm going to give him a stern talking to. I'm going to set him straight. Jesus didn't do that. What's he do? What did he do? First off, Peter recognized that this is not where it has to end for me. Peter's like, I don't have to sing. Right there stands Jesus. That's the man that can save me. That's the man that can make it right. So what did Peter do? He immediately hollered out, Jesus, save me. Jesus didn't walk over there and give him a talking to. Immediately, Jesus reached out his arm, grabbed Peter, pulled him up, took him to the boat, and then said, oh, you little faith, why did you doubt? Jesus was always there for Peter, you see. He just wanted Peter to ask. He was just waiting on Peter to ask for his help. Just like he is with you and I tonight. He's there waiting for you to ask for help. If you have not been baptized and started your walk with Jesus, you can tonight. you've took off, but you've paid a little bit more attention to the circumstances that life has brought your way, the obstacles that the winds of life have blown in front of you. And you've started to sink, or you've taken your focus off of Jesus. You can get that back tonight. He's there waiting. All you have to do is ask. If anyone needs anything, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.
Someday you'll stand at the wall.